So in this video, I want to talk about up-travel limiters and how it differs from down-travel limiters and why you would use them. So a down-travel limiter will limit the total amount of droop you have in your suspension arms, okay? And you would typically change that in a 1/10 scale chassis by taking apart the shock and putting spacers under the shock piston inside the shock body, reassembling the shocks, and that would change the total length of the shock, okay? And that changes your droop. On a 1/8 scale chassis, you would change that by adjusting a droop screw that physically limits the suspension arm travel relative to the chassis, and the screw kind of stops on the chassis, and that limits your total droop. The effect is the same, whether you have a droop screw or an actual physical down travel limiter in the shock itself. It just changes how much total droop you have. An up-travel limiter correspondingly changes how much total up-travel the shock has, or in other words, how much shock compression you have before the suspension travel stops. And you would change that by adding spacers to the shock shaft outside of the shock body. So, for example, you can see over here on my X91, I have some red O-ring spacers there on the bottom of the rear shocks, also on the front shocks as well. And there are two reasons that you might want to use down travel limiters. The first one is perhaps the most obvious reason, which would be to limit how much chassis slap you have as the suspension travels. So here, for example, on my Kyosho Laser ZXR, with the particular shocks that I'm using, I have more suspension travel than I actually need. So if I'm landing a jump vertically, okay, I have all of this space here that the suspension can travel before the chassis bottoms out. And with the chassis fully bottomed out, maybe it's a little hard to see, there's still a little bit of shock travel left in the shocks, which if I'm only concerned about how the car jumps and lands, I may want to add some up-travel limiters there to limit the suspension travel, to basically stop suspension travel right before the chassis bottoms out. And that just saves me some physical damage on the chassis itself. There's a more subtle reason why you would want to use an up-travel limiter. So if you remember from the down-travel limiter video, by adding, let's see, how do I want to do this? Here's what I'll do. As a car corners, okay, you have a lateral load that's transferring weight to the outside of the car. So let's suppose that I have an up-travel limiter here on this side of the shock, and it stops the suspension travel right about here, okay? So what that means is with an up-travel limiter, it will limit the full extent to which the chassis can roll. Okay, so with an up-travel limiter, I stop the roll here, or maybe here, or maybe here, okay? Now, by limiting how much the chassis rolls, I'm limiting how much total left to right weight transfer I have during cornering. Now, I can use this to make the chassis more responsive. If I'm limiting the total weight transfer, then that means there's less weight that I have to transfer back in the other direction if I'm changing directions. Another reason for it is if I have the suspension set up for, say, low camber gain, so that way I have the most corner exit grip as possible, and it keeps the car nice and straight, and so that it doesn't get loose on corner exit when I apply power. Then the problem with low camber gain is that when the chassis rolls, okay, I end up with a lot of positive camber on the outside wheel. So what I can do is add an up-travel limiter to limit the total suspension travel so that at maximum travel, when I hit that up-travel limiter, the outside tire hasn't over-rolled, for lack of a better term. It hasn't rolled so much that I end up losing grip on the outside tire. Okay, so an up-travel limiter can allow me to retain or basically maximize the chassis roll up to the point where I just start to lose grip on the outside tire at full roll. Okay, so that's what an up-travel limiter does. It can help you with the grip on the outer tire. A down travel limiter under the same cornering condition will help you with the grip on the inside tire. So let's say this car is turning to the left. That means the weight transfers to the right. So I add an up travel limiter here to make sure that I only roll the chassis so much and I don't end up riding the outside sidewall of the tire during cornering. Okay, but then while the suspension is stopped at that up travel limiter, there's still the potential for the inside suspension to keep drooping further and further and further and end up reducing the contact patch of the inside tire to the track. So what I would do here to limit the total or to modulate the total amount of contact patch on the inside tire is change the down travel limiter. So up travel limiter affects the total traction on the outside tire during cornering. An up travel limiter affects that. A down travel limiter will affect how much contact patch you have on the inside tire during a maximum cornering load. Okay, and you would adjust these appropriately given the track conditions you have and what kind of setup compromises you're willing to make. So again, the example I am illustrating here is if you have, say, low camber gain for a particular track condition, such that maybe on corner exit you find the car is loose, so you reduce the camber gain to keep the rear end a bit more stable on corner exit, but then the price you pay for that is mid-corner the car wants to slide more. Okay, well, I can add an up travel limiter or maybe increase the roll center, but if I increase the roll center, that might make the car slide mid-corner because now the car is rolling less, and so that's going to put more pressure on the tires, and so I won't have as much grip. So maybe I keep the roll center low to allow the car to roll more, but I keep the camber gain low so that on corner exit the wheels are straighter and I get more grip on corner exit. But then because of that, the chassis is rolling so much, I need to add an up travel limiter to limit how much I lose traction on, or how much the outside wheel kind of cambers over during full cornering load. Okay, so that's why you would use an up travel limiter instead of a down travel limiter. One is for the impact on cornering, which I hope is made clear now, and the other is for the total suspension travel vertically to keep the chassis from bottoming out. But this is less of a issue than the actual cornering impact. That's probably the more significant reason why you would use an up travel limiter. Okay, so I hope that is made clear through this video, and if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. Thanks for watching.